11 और साढ़े
Hello and a very warm welcome to World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, in the week gone by, India has managed a significant victory at the UNSC with the listing of Pak-based terrorist Abdul Rehman Makki, while Indian dignitaries have now penned a scathing letter slamming the BBC documentary on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We'll delve deeper into our top stories in just a bit, but first up are the headlines. In a major diplomatic win for India, the UNSC designates Pak-based LET Deputy Leader Abdul Rehman Makki as a global terrorist. This as Pak Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif makes a peace offer to India, but can Pakistan be trusted? The BBC documentary row with the characterization of Prime Minister Narendra Modi escalates after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak defends his Indian counterpart. Over 300 Indian dignitaries write a scathing letter to the British Broadcasting Corporation. The Australian government begins investigation into 2 attacks on Hindu temples in Melbourne. It's suspected that Khalistani groups are behind the hate crimes. And as Sri Lanka reels under one of its worst economic crises, India steps up to help with its debt recovery as one of its top creditors. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar pays a 2-day visit to Colombo with an offer of over $4 billion in terms of credits and rollovers to help the island nation. Now, earlier this week, one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, the number 2 in the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Abdul Rehman Makki, was blacklisted by the United Nations Security Council. It is a significant win because Makki's proscribing was put on hold by China for the last 6 months. Now, in its defense, China said that listing of terrorists is conducive to enhancing global counterterrorism cooperation. But Beijing, at the same time, also praised Islamabad for backing counterterrorism efforts. New Delhi was quick in welcoming the UNSC decision.
We welcome the decision of the UN Security Council's ISI and Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee to list Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist Abdul Rehman Makki, who is also the brother-in-law of LET leader Hafiz Saeed. Makki has occupied various leadership roles in the LET, including raising funds for the organization. Threats from terrorist organizations in the region remain high, and listings and sanctions by the UN Security Council are an effective tool to curb such threats and dismantle terror infrastructure in the region. India remains committed to pursuing a zero-tolerance approach to terrorism and will continue to press the international community to take credible, verifiable, and irreversible action against terrorism.
Now, it should also be noted that the 68-year-old Makki is the brother-in-law of Jamaat-ud-Dawa chief and Mumbai attack mastermind Hafiz Saeed. Be it the Red Fort attack of 2000 or the Mumbai terror attacks of 2008, Makki has unleashed terror in India for more than 2 decades. And by blacklisting Makki, the 1267 Committee of the UNSC has now subjected him to an asset freeze, travel ban and arms embargo after years of effort by India. China's attempts to place technical holds at UNSC have become a major irritant in the troubled ties between New Delhi and Beijing. But going by its latest move, is China now sending a softening signal to India? More importantly, will this help bring the likes of global terrorists Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar to face justice for their various acts of terror in India? And does blacklisting mean that it will lead to a wipeout of terrorism? Let's not forget that the responsibility of implementing sanction lies with Pakistan, especially considering that it is the Pak government and ISI which continue to support terror activities. Interestingly, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has called for peace talks with India. In an interview to Dubai-based Al Arabiya TV, Sharif said that Pakistan had learned its lesson after 3 wars with India. He also brought up the subject of Kashmir. Let's listen in to what the Pak Prime Minister has to say.
And we want to live in peace with India, provided we are able to resolve our genuine problems. My message to the Indian leadership and Prime Minister Modi is that let's sit down and have serious and sincere talks to resolve our burning issues. like Kashmir, where flagrant violation of human rights are taking place day in and day out.
India's former representative to the United Nations, Syed Akbaruddin, joins me live to weigh in on this significant development and what it means for India. Ambassador Akbaruddin, thank you so much for giving us your precious time. Now, let me begin by focusing on China first. China has been on a blocking spree since 2009 at the UNSC. What, in your view, explains China's move to remove these objections to Makki's blacklisting, especially after the recent skirmish in Tawang?
First of all, Akanksha, thank you very much for having me on your show. Today, it becomes very difficult to transparently support a terrorist than it was, say, 10 years ago, because the processes have changed. In case you do it at a subterranean level, it was possible in the past, but now these things come out. There is global pressure on why does a country support terrorism, etc., etc. So there's a global level. The other part is linked with India. And that is India has, despite other concerns, always factored in countering terrorism as a major foreign policy concern. So as India's global interests increase, it's able to leverage its ties with other countries in a better manner than it used to do before.
Right.
So it took us 10 years last time. It's taken us just less than 1 year this time to get Makki designated. So that's the fundamental change. India's role and also greater engagements globally, as well as the evolution of global international law on listing.
All right. Ambassador, even if terrorists are sanctioned, how much of an impact does it have on their capacity for terrorist activities, especially when the Pak government and the ISI continue to support terrorism?
I think it's a valid question, and we need to again understand the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that counterterrorism and listing is only one part of the bigger jigsaw puzzle. Once states have an obligation to act against terrorists, if they don't do so, it would then attract other global agencies engaged with them to take decisive action. So by this, what do I mean? The listing is a United Nations Security Council process, but embedded in the FATF regulations, that is the Financial Action Task Force regulations,
right.
There is a requirement for all to fulfill those stipulations that are provided by the Security Council. Now, if you don't do that, what happens is that the FATF can shift you from one arena to another, from a non-listing space to a grey list or a blacklist. What happens if this change is undertaken? It impacts on the financial stress of a country. Right. So it's not such an easy thing to totally violate UN norms, because the implications elsewhere downside are much more serious.
Fair enough. Ambassador, how do you assess the Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's overture? Would you even call it a peace offer, especially when the usual rider and precondition remains Kashmir? And can Pakistan even be trusted when Shehbaz Sharif says that Pakistan has learned its lesson? Has it learned its lesson?
Well, Pakistan is a country in a difficult, rather chaotic political situation today. Let's understand that we need to see this not only through its ties with India, but largely of a domestic nature. Shehbaz Sharif is fighting a fratricidal war with Imran Khan, who in turn is at war with sections of the Pakistani army. So we need to see it in that prism. This is a domestic issue. Pakistan needs to solve its domestic problems before it is ready to engage India. Today, it's not in that position with elections likely to happen this year. They need stability. They need internal consensus before they look towards India. So I think we should leave this as background noise coming from a country which is a bit in a stressful situation, and chaos is what is the norm there. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on bigger issues. India has bigger fish to fry. We are looking at a role as transitioning from a balancing power to a leading power as part of G20 and the presidency that we have this year.
All right. It's interesting you talk about India's growing role at an international level. At a time, India is assuming presidency of two global bodies, the G20 and SCO. Not to forget the UNSC presidency that happened for a second time in 2 years. Yet a permanent seat in the UNSC eludes us. Why so?
So, legally, international orders change usually after cataclysms. That's the unfortunate truth, that the UN came into being after a cataclysmic event, which was World War II. So they've made change an extremely difficult process to overcome. And the complications are not related to India's role in a revamped Security Council, but the role of other issues. So, for example, there are issues related to the veto. Several countries do not feel that the veto should continue. It's an anachronism. Yes. There are others who feel that any touching of the veto will render any reform process unacceptable to them. Then there are who would represent other parts of the world, like Africa. So India is sui generis. I don't think there is a problem about India being accepted on the Security Council, except for some discordant voices. We don't need to worry about that.
All right. We'll have to leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Ambassador Akbaruddin, for giving us your precious time and sharing those valuable insights with us here at CNN News 18. And with that, let's now shift our attention over to the war in Ukraine. It will be a year in February since Russia began its war in Ukraine. And here are the developments that have taken place this week. A helicopter carrying the leadership team of Ukraine's Interior Ministry crashed near a kindergarten and residential block in the Kyiv region on Wednesday, killing at least 14 people, including all 9 people on board. Now, this crash included the Interior Minister of Ukraine, Denis Monastyrsky. Meanwhile, there's growing assistance by NATO countries to Ukraine. A wide-ranging package of heavy weapons is going to be supplied to Ukraine. The United States is adding a $2.5 billion package, making the total amount of US aid to Ukraine $27.5 billion. Now, Ukraine dominated the World Economic Forum as well, with NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg reiterating that they will continue with their efforts to back Ukraine. A few of the nations contributing more support to aid include Slovakia, Poland and Lithuania. But in a crucial meeting on Friday, Western allies failed to hammer out an agreement on sending German-made battle tanks to help Ukraine. The failure, of course, has overshadowed the commitments from nations, including the $27.5 billion support from the United States alone in totality. And with that, let me now shift focus over to the much controversial BBC documentary. The BBC has come out with a documentary about the 2002 Gujarat riots titled The Modi Question. Slamming the documentary, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said, and I quote, "The bias, lack of objectivity and continuing colonial mindset is blatantly visible." Interestingly, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak shut down a Pakistan origin MP, Imran Hussain, who raised the topic of the documentary in the House of Commons on Thursday by saying he doesn't agree with the characterization.
Do note that this has not been screened in India, so I am only going to comment on the context of what I have heard about or have my colleagues have seen. Let me just make it very clear. We think this is a propaganda piece designed to push a particular discredited narrative. The bias, a lack of objectivity, and frankly a continuing colonial mindset is blatantly visible. If anything, this film or documentary is a reflection on the agency and individuals that are peddling this narrative again. It makes us wonder whether about the purpose of this exercise and the agenda behind it. And frankly, we do not wish to dignify such efforts.
Mr. Speaker, last night the BBC revealed the Foreign Office knew the extent of Narendra Modi's involvement in the Gujarat massacre that paved the way for the persecution of Muslims and other minorities we see in India today, with senior diplomats reporting that the massacre could not have taken place without a climate of impunity created by Modi, and that he was, in the FCO's own words, directly responsible for this violence. Given that hundreds were brutally killed and that families across India and the world, including here in the UK, are still without justice, does the Prime Minister agree with his diplomats in the Foreign Office that Modi was directly responsible? And just what more does the Foreign Office know of his involvement in this grave act of ethnic cleansing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the UK government's position on this has been clear and long-standing and hasn't changed. Of course, we don't tolerate persecution where it appears anywhere, but I'm not sure I agree at all with the characterisation that the honourable gentleman has put forward.
And CNN News 18 Sanjay Suri joins me live from London with more. Sanjay, over 300 dignitaries in India have slammed this BBC documentary for its selective chronicling of events and shallow accounting of facts. Could you outline why this documentary is problematic, especially after India's Supreme Court already has given a clean chit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
One interview after another says that they were hearing orders coming from the top. Someone else says, I believe Modi was responsible. Now, this is all hearsay. It is self-confessedly, self-declaredly, self-evidently hearsay that the BBC is now airing at length. These are not even new allegations that BBC is airing. They've been around 20 years now, and BBC has not here conducted any investigation. It has not dug out any new facts, no new evidence, nothing at all, nothing new here, nothing to substantiate what is being presented as a fact. Now, this kind of methodology, if you want to call it that, would be just as unsound if it were to be applied, say, to content on Rahul Gandhi or anyone else. And now, given the clear political aim, the airing of such allegations with no offer of evidence does raise the question what it is that the BBC is trying to do here.
That's a valid question. Many thanks to you, Sanjay, for bringing in your inputs. And with that, let me shift attention over to Australia. Over the last 10 days, there have been 2 attacks on Hindu temples in Australia's Melbourne city, allegedly by Khalistan supporters. On 12th of January, the Swaminarayan temple was vandalized in Melbourne. Anti-India and anti-Hindu graffiti was sprayed all over the walls. On 16th of January, just days after the first incident took place, the historic Sri Shiva Vishnu temple was vandalized in Melbourne again. Now, Australian authorities are investigating these incidents, and the Ministry of External Affairs, as well as the Australian High Commissioner to India, have both come out in the open to condemn this vandalism. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break. But don't go anywhere, because we'll be back with the latest on External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar's visit to Sri Lanka.